In this presentation, we will put together a budgeted profit and loss report, a budgeted income statement within QuickBooks Pro 2020, QuickBooks Desktop 2020. Here we are in our Get Great Guitars file. We currently have the Open Windows open. You can open the Open Windows by selecting the View dropdown and the Open Windows list. We're now going to be creating a budget. We're going to be creating a profit and loss or income statement type budget to project out into the future. To do that, let's consider our income statement. So we're going to go to the Reports dropdown. We're going to go down to the Company and Financials, and then to the Profit and Loss Standard. Now, currently we have the profit and loss in there for 2 months of information. So we've got from 01/01/20 to 02/29/20. You'll note that the profit and loss is the report that's going to have a timing type of component to it. It's a measurement of how we are doing over time. It's the revenue and the expenses, meaning how much did we earn over a specific time period or time frame, how much expenses did we have to incur in order to generate that same revenue over that time frame. So this is the report then that we would typically think of as a projection as well. When we're trying to project how well we will do into the future, we typically think of the profit and loss because that's going to be that performance report. We could do a budgeted balance sheet and will as well, but note what the balance sheet is doing is basically saying where will we stand, where will we be at the end of a certain time period. The profit and loss report is going to be the activity that's going to be the performance of us getting to that point that we will then be at the end of that time period. When we think about a profit and loss, the budgeted performance or how to put together a budget, we won't go into a lot of detail on the different kind of dynamics of putting together the budget. We're going to be on the logistical side here, how to enter it into QuickBooks. But just note, obviously the budget usually starts by basically looking at last period or last year, and then considering that budget and then trying to use that information to forecast into the future, considering any new information into the future. So usually the starting point would be to take basically last year's numbers possibly and divide them by maybe 12 and then try to think about the monthly information on a budgetary flow for the profit and loss, and then basically consider any differences or any changes that would basically be happening because of things that would happen in the future or different scenarios that could be taking place. So that's usually the starting point that you would basically think of. And so what we want to do now is project out into the future to see how we will do. From a logistical standpoint within QuickBooks, it's great to have the budget because once we put the budget into place, we can then let QuickBooks run reports for us, including not just the standard budget report, but also a comparison between what actually happened and the budgeted numbers. For that reason, we're actually going to be entering the budget including January and February, even though we've already entered that data into the system, so that we can then run reports for January and February and see how we would then run reports that are kind of that comparative report of the budget versus the actual. So we'll run a full budget for the whole year of 2020, including the 2 months that we have already done. And that will allow us to run projection reports as well as to go back in and run the comparison of the budget versus actual. So to run the budget, we're going to go up top to the company dropdown. We want to then go to the planning and budgeting, and we want to set up budgets. So we're going to go to set up budgets. And then within the set up budgets, we have the begin by specifying the year and type for the new budget. We're going to say it's going to be 2020 and choose the budget type. The default is typically going to be the profit and loss. That's going to be the typical kind of budget statement we would think of. So we're going to do 2020 profit and loss. So no additional criteria. We're going to keep it there. No customer jobs. In other words, say next. And we're going to create the budget from scratch. The other option would be to create budget from previous year's actual data. And notice once again, that's where we said we often start thinking about the budget from that standpoint. What happened last year? We're going to have a similar type of year, or at least use that as the baseline and then go from there. However, here, we're going to create the budget entirely from scratch. We will then finish. You'll note the drop down up top, we've got the profit and loss, and then we have our information, our accounts. We can widen these cells if we so choose. We have the accounts on the left. We have the months up top for 2020, and then the months will sum up to this beginning number, which will be the total for the entire year. So once again, we're going to be entering January and February and the entire time period. This might look very tedious, and it is a bit tedious. However, we do have some options within QuickBooks which will make it a little bit easier. We can basically autofill some of the cells for us, so it won't be as bad as you might think to enter every cell in here. Also note that as we do this, we are doing a projection, and therefore we're going to do kind of an estimate, and so our numbers would often be rounded within a budget. This isn't an actual or the most precise type of thing. We're trying to budget out an estimate into the future. So we're going to start first with the merchandise sales. We're going to say the merchandise sales are going to be 500 and say tab. Then I'm going to go back on that 500 and I want to copy it across, but I also want to predict that the merchandise sales are going to go up by a standard rate. So we think this one is actually going to increase. Now note the sales are a little bit more confusing, a little bit more difficult oftentimes than the expenses, because when we think about the expenses, they will typically be fairly standard. In other words, the utility bill, if we estimate whatever it will be, it will typically be, we'll estimate that for the entire year. There might be some higher months than others, but pretty much it'll be standardized. And the accounts up here, with regards to the merchandise sales, we're thinking that hopefully it will rise over the time period, and therefore we have to put in some kind of different number in each month. One way we could do that, if there's some kind of standard rate that we think it's going to increase by, is to go then to the adjust row amounts. We're then going to select the currently selected month. So that's the month we're on in January. And then we have some options here. The first option, increase each remaining monthly amount in this row by this dollar amount or percentage. So we could use a dollar or percentage here. So if I delete the percentage sign, then it would be by the dollar amount. If I keep the percentage sign, we're going to say percent. We are going to use 15%. So we think it's going to be increasing by 15%. Now this down here says to enable compounding. So if it's going to increase 15% from January to February, and then February to March, and so on and so forth, then that would be compounding. That's what we want here. So I'm going to enable the compounding. And then we're going to say, okay. If we take out the trusty calculator, we're going to say, all right, what happened here? We've got the 575 times, I'm going to say 1.15, the increase of 15%, 115%. And that gives us the 66125. If I take that and multiply it times the 1.15, 115%, or an increase of 15%, we get the 760. So that makes it a little bit easier for us to copy this across and not as tedious for the data input. Next, we have the rent music equipment, which we're going to put 1,000 in. So we're going to put 1,000 there. And once again, I'm going to adjust this and say it will be increasing across the month. So I'm going to say adjust row amounts. Within the adjust row amounts, I'm going to say the currently selected month, this time deleting the percentage. And I'm going to say that that's just going to increase by $1,000. And that's going to compound as well. So it's going to increase by another 1,000 each month. Then we'll say okay. And there we have that. It didn't compound. Let's check it again. I'm going to go to the adjust rows and amounts. And it's going to go current month. I'm going to say 1,000 here. And then enable compounding and okay. So now it worked. All right. So we got the 1,000, then the 2,000, then the 3,000, and so on. Same kind of concept here, but rather than using a percentage to increase, we used a flat number to increase it. Now we're going to skip the sales discount and we're going to move down to the service income. We're going to put 2,500 there. And without going into another cell, once again, we're going to go down to the adjust row amounts. Within adjust row amounts, we're then going to pick the currently selected month. We're going to increase each row monthly, and we will do so this time by $500. So we're going to say it's going to increase 500 over and above the prior increase. It will, in essence, be, in other words, compounding. So tack here. So we're going to have enable compounding, and then we will say okay. And so now it's at 2,500, 3,000, 3,500, and so on and so forth. Next, we're going to go to the cost of goods sold. Within the cost of goods sold, we're going to start at 400. Now, you'll note that the cost of goods sold is tied to, oftentimes, the merchandise sales. So the cost of goods sold is tied to, in some ways, the merchandise sale. In other words, the cost of goods sold, 400, is divided by 575, or 69.5956% of the merchandise sales. You would think then that that would be a standardized kind of percentage that would flow forward. So in other words, if the sales then went up to 661.15, an increase of 15%, you would think that this a percentage times the 661.25 would be the cost of goods sold, because it would increase at a fixed amount. We're going to use that relationship, and therefore the way that we can get that relationship going is we're going to say, well, if the sales went up for merchandise sales by 15%, then you would think the cost of goods sold then would also increase by that same rate, 15%. So that's what we'll do down here. We're going to go to the adjust row amounts. We're going to have the currently selected month. We're going to use the percentage this time, and we're going to be using 15%. So it's going to be going up by the 15%. It will be compounding, so we will enable compounding. Then we're going to say OK. And so there we have that. Now you'll note that if we take any of these amounts then, if I take the 529 divided by the 760.44, we get that 0.69 or 69.56%. So we have the same kind of relationship between cost of goods sold and the merchandise sales. So now we're going to use some of the easier kind of sales. We're not going to use every expense account. We're going to put the information we think are going to be in the relevant type of accounts. And so we're going to start with the bank service charges. Within the bank service charges, I'm going to put 10. And now this is going to be the same. We're just going to say that's going to be the same each month. So now we don't even have to increase it. We can just say copy that across. So that's going to be easier. That'll sum up, of course, to the 120 for the entire year. We're going to say the computer and internet. We're going to put 150. Same process. I'm going to just say copy that across the 150 to get to the total 1,800. We'll do that down here in the depreciation. We're going to say 775, and then we will copy that across to get to the full 9,300. Then we're going to go down here to the insurance expense, put in the 1,000 for the insurance expense. We're going to copy that across. That adds up to the 12,000 total. Then we are in the interest expense. Within interest expense, we'll put in the 300. We will copy that across. That adds up to the 3,600 total. Next, we're going to move down to the payroll down here. So the payroll expense, within payroll expense, we're going to put 6,000, and we're going to copy that across. So we're going to copy that across. That adds up to the 72,000 total. Then we're going to go down to the telephone expense, where we will enter 360. Then I'm going to copy that across, and that'll add up to the 4,320 total. Next, we're going to go down to the utilities. We're going to put in the 650, and then copy that across, adds up to the 7,800 total. So now what we will do is save this. I'm going to say save, and then I'm going to say OK. Save and OK. Now we can go ahead and take a look at our reports for the budgeted information. We're in the standard profit and loss now. Let's consider the budget. We're going to then go to the reports drop down up top. We're going to go down to the budgets, and then we want to take first a look at the budget overview. The two major reports being the budget overview and the budget versus the actual. So we're going to go to the budget overview report. We want the profit and loss. That's all we have at this point in time. And we're going to say next, months, account by month. That's all we have. And so we're going to say next and then finish this item. And so there's going to be our profit and loss budget overview. So it breaks this information out by month. So we see each month here. And then if we were to scroll all the way to the right, we're going to get the total for the year. So here's our total at the years, and it's going to be broken out in a monthly fashion. Now we can adjust this report in a similar fashion as with the customized reports up top. We can also adjust the dates if we so choose to as well. So if we just wanted to basically do 3 months, the first quarter, 03/31/20, then we can say 03/31/20, then we could just see a partial part of the year related to it. So this is going to be our profit and loss. Remember, this is the budgeted profit and loss, not the actual. And then next step is to compare this to the actual. But let's first export this to Excel. So I'm going to go 12/31/20. This is going to be our budgeted profit and loss. Let's export it to Excel and print it. So I'm going to go to the Excel. We're going to create a new worksheet. And then we're going to put that into as well a new workbook. So we're going to create a new workbook with a new worksheet to it. Here we have it. So our standard policy or standard procedures would then go to the first tab. I'm going to delete this tab. I'm going to delete that and say okay. And then within this tab, I'm going to go to the page layout view. I'm going to say okay. That then shows our page splits. We're going to go up to the view up top. We're going to go to the window and we're going to remove the splits. So there we have that. Now it doesn't fit on one page. So I'm going to go back to the normal. Actually, let's double click on here while we have our title up top. I'm going to say profit and loss budget. And then go back to our first tab. And then we can do some formatting here. So once again, we might want to delete all the columns that aren't useful. So I'm going to highlight A, G. I'm holding down Control I, K, M, O, Q, S, U, W, Y, AA, and AC. Letting go of Control, right clicking on those and delete those. And we still have 2 pages. Now let's try the orientation. I can go to the page layout up top. We can go to the page setup, orientation, portrait, make it landscape. So it's now almost there. We could now keep adjusting the formatting. For example, we might be able to adjust some of these columns, put these all in one column perhaps. Or we can go to the File tab. We can go to the printing option. And then I usually go down to the scaling. We could scale it to one page, or we could use some kind of custom scaling option. So within the custom scaling option, we might want to just adjust it down a bit and see what happens. So if I put it at 90%, for example, we've got through December, but not the total. If I keep on adjusting it down a bit, I'm going to go to 80%. Then we have the total kind of fits in there. And you can do some adjusting like that. Notice how much smaller it is now. That's going to be the drawback of doing that type of adjustment. We're then going to go back over. We're going to go to File tab and Save As. We're going to browse and see where we want to put this. We're going to be putting it on our desktop. So we're going to go to the desktop. We're going to go to the Get Great Guitars file. And this is going to be section 11. So I'm going to make a new folder. And we're going to call it section 11. Section 11, the new folder. We'll then go into that. So I'm going to double click on it. I'm going to change the name of our file to budget for 2020. We will then save that and say yes. Close this back out. The other report that we can make with the budgeted numbers is the budget versus the actual. So let's close this back out. Let's see that report. Drop down here. We're going to go to the budgets, and now we want the budget versus the actual. Budget versus actual. And then we're going to say that we want the profit and loss. That's all we have. And months, that's good. Next, and finished. So then we have the budget versus actual. It's going with the date for the entire year. Obviously, we don't have the entire year's worth of data in there on the actual side. We only have 2 months worth of data for budget versus actual. So we can then say, let's make this from January 1st to 02/29/20, and then our budgeted numbers and our actual numbers by month. So we have the first month here. It's going to be showing the latest month first. So we've got the month of February. This is the actual number. We then have the budgeted number, the difference in terms of the dollar change, and the percentage of the budget. Now, note, obviously, we entered this just basically as a practice budget. Also, it's going to be the first year of operation. Therefore, our budget is not too close to what actually happened on the first month. And you can check out the changes basically to the second month. So here's our difference in dollar amounts. And then here's our differences in percentages. So now we're going to basically print this thing out. So let's do the same process with the profit and loss budget versus actual. We're then going to go to the print up top. Actually, I'm going to go to Excel up top. We're going to create a new worksheet. We're going to take this to an existing workbook this time, however. Existing workbook. Let's go ahead and browse to find that workbook. We're then going to go to the drop down. We want to be in Get Great Guitars. We want to be in section 11. Within section 11, I'm going to double click on the budget. and open that item up. So we will then export to it. Here we have it. We're going to do our similar type of process that we did in the prior worksheets whenever we export to Excel. I'm going to pull this sheet to the right. I'm going to put my cursor, left click on it, pull it to the right. Didn't pull, there it goes. And then we're going to select this first item. I'm going to delete this, right clicking on it and deleting it. And then I'm going to go back to the first sheet. We're going to go to the page layout. Within the page layout, we're going to see that we have the splits in place. To get the splits removed, we're going to go up to the View tab up top in the Windows group and select Splits, and that'll remove the splits from them. Then we're going to go back to the first normal view. Back to the normal view. We could then adjust the settings for this. Once again, deleting all the columns we don't need. So I'm going to say A, G, I, K, M, O, Q, I'm holding down Control to do this, U, W, Y, and the double A. I'm going to right click, letting go of Control, right click on one of the selected areas and delete it. So we will delete, and there we have that. Almost there now. Now we're going to change the orientation. Actually, we have 2 pages, so let's go change the orientation in the page layout up top, page setup, orientation. We want to go to the landscape. Landscape orientation, fairly close, not quite there. Let's then go to the File tab up top. We're going to go to Print, and then we will go to the Scaling, and I'm going to customize the scaling options. Let's go make it down to 80% as we did with the last one, and OK. And so that looks like it fits on one page, so that looks good. Now we could think about how we can format this item to print both of these reports in one PDF file, and that would be done by selecting the Print Entire Workbook or Entire Workbook. So we have the first page here, and then the second page. Everything fits on one page wide. We have 2 pages. Again, it might be nicer if you were actually to adjust this out a little bit more to eliminate some of this extra space and then make the font a little bit larger. But this, at least it fits on one page wide, and we have the same kind of font on both since they're both at 80%. So let's go ahead and print this. We're going to save it as a cute PDF by using the printing option. We will select print. Then we're going to find our printing option here. I'm going to go to the Get Great Guitars. We're going to put it in section 11. Within section 11, I'm going to keep it at the budget for 2020 and save that report.